Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies as we continue with Part 4, the Entered Apprentice Degree Continued, from Symbolism of the Three Degrees by Oliver Day Street. Part 1, the Entered Apprentice Degree. The 24-inch gauge is a symbol of time, but not in the sense, as we learn in the third degree, that the scythe symbolizes time. The scythe denotes the fleetness of time and the brevity of all things human, while the 24-inch gauge typifies time well spent. It teaches us the value of our time, that time wasted can never be regained, that it is a priceless commodity, that there is a time for all things, a time for labor, a time for rest, a time for amusement, a time for worship, and a time for the relief of distress. It is the same lesson so beautifully taught in Ecclesiastes 3:1-3, or redacted by Yestul in a Gentle Cynic, page 209. Everything has its appointed time, and there is a time for everything under the sun. There is a time to be born and a time to die. There is a time for planting and a time for uprooting. In other words, let everything be done in time and in order, so that none of this most valuable gift of God to man shall be wasted. How few of us place an adequate estimate upon the value of our time. Note those who sit around and whittle and chew tobacco. The gauge being divided into 24 inches, it naturally, in a system like ours, becomes the symbol of the 24 hours of the day. The common gavel, or stoneman's hammer, was the tool with which the apprentice performed those first operations involved in fitting a stone for its proper place in the building, such as breaking off the corners of rough stones, or, as expressed in England, emulation working, to knock off all superfluous knobs and excretions. It was not adapted to giving polish or ornamentation to the stone, and hence it should symbolize only that training of the youth which is designed to give mechanical skill, and to divest him of those social habits which characterize man in a state of nature. In Canada, it is said to teach that labor is the lot of man, and that qualities of heart and head are of limited value, if the hand be not prompt to execute the design of the master. However, since the chisel has fallen into disuse in the United States and many other countries as a Blue Lodge symbol, the symbolism of the common gavel has been extended so that it now typifies the enlightening and ennobling effects of training and education in all its various branches. The chisel has a symbolism somewhat akin to that of the common gavel or stone's hammer. The gavel was used only in the earlier processes of dressing the stone, and is not adapted, as we have just said, to giving it a high polish or ornamentation. It therefore symbolizes the early steps in the education and moral training of the youth, when it is desired to give a higher finish to the stone, or to give it an ornamental shape, or to engrave designs upon it. The chisel was and still is brought into play. The chisel therefore symbolizes those advanced studies and trainings which give a man polish and refinement and fit him for the highest stations in life. In the United States, the chisel is practically obsolete in blue masonry, but it appears in the beautiful marked master's degree, where it is said to demonstrate the advantages of discipline and education. In England, emulation working, it is said to point out to us the advantages of education, by which means alone we are rendered fit members of regularly organized society. In Canada, it is said to teach that nothing short of indefatigable excursion can induce the habit of virtue, enlighten the mind, and render the soul pure. We regard it as a distinct loss to Blue Lodge symbolism in the United States that the chisel has been surrendered to capitular masonry. Its proper place is in the fellowcraft degree, from which many believe the marked master's degree to have been originally taken. The key has a beautiful symbolism familiar to English masons, but unknown to us. It symbolizes the tongue and teaches us that it should always be ready to speak in a brother's defense and, and never lied to his prejudice. Emulation working, English, gives this charge. That excellent key, a Freemason's tongue, which should speak well of a brother absent or present, and when unfortunately that cannot be done, with honor and propriety, should adopt that excellent virtue of the craft, which is silence. Solomon's Temple, a symbol which appears early in this degree and reoccurs in many subsequent degrees and rites, is that of Solomon's Temple. If building symbolizes the development of the human mind and character, nothing is more logical than that the most perfect building known should be chosen as a symbol of a perfect character. But in this connection, it is often asked, why not the Parthenon, or Pantheon, or the Pantheon, or the Temple of Zeus at Athens, chosen for this symbol? Two answers are possible. First, a tradition has prevailed since long before the birth of Christ that the Temple of Solomon was the most artistic and the most highly wrought structure ever erected by man. Second, if masonry had its origin at the time and under the circumstances claimed by our traditions, namely at the building of the temple, it would be inevitable that Solomon's temple should be chosen as this symbol. Of course, historians laugh at this claim, but historians have laughed at many things which have turned out to be true. Without assuming to assert that it is true, we desire to point out what is at least a plausible hypothesis underlying this tradition. Many Masonic writers have maintained, apparently with reason, that earlier than 1,000 years before Christ, the priests of Dionysius or Bacchus, devoting themselves to architecture in the erection of their temples, had founded the Fraternity of Dionysian Architecture, and that these in the course of time spread throughout Asia Minor and Phoenicia, and gradually acquired the exclusive privilege of erecting the temples and the public buildings. It is supposed by them that Hiram King of Tyre, whom we know to have been the erector of great buildings, Hiram Abiff, and the Tyrians, who were sent to assist King Solomon in the building of his temple, were members of this fraternity. Granted the existence of such buildings as King Hiram erected, they can scarcely be accounted for except by supposing the existence of a society of builders who erected them. If such a society existed in Phoenicia at that date, it would be remarkable if Hiram Abiff and the other Tyrian artificers were not members of it, and it would naturally follow that at least the skilled workmen on Solomon's temple would be similarly organized. A corroborating circumstance of our temple tradition is that precisely at the time of Solomon, Judah was the most powerful, and Phoenicia the most enlightened artistically and commercially of all the nations of the world. This was many centuries before the ascendancy of Greece, and 1,000 years before Rome extended her possessions beyond Italy. Solomon's temple antedates the earliest known remains of historic Greek architecture by nearly 300 years. Archaeology thus corroborates the claim of both biblical and Masonic tradition that down to its time no building had been erected equal to it in splendor and beautiful finish. Its construction naturally called in requisition the Tyrians, they being neighbors and the most finished artisans of the time. The secret society habit was quite as common among men then as it is now. Their long association together and their pride in such a great work would just as naturally lead them to form themselves into society, as like motives led the soldiers of our Revolutionary and Civil Wars to form patriotic societies. We have seen that there were already in existence and at hand secret societies which needed only a slight modification to make them much like what our traditions say Masonry then was. The probabilities all favor the conclusion that the temple was built by a society of Masons. Nor is there anything incredible in the theory that Solomon, who was prosecuting this work, and Hiram, king of Tyre, whose subjects many of the builders were, condescended to honor the society with their patronage and favor, thus linking their names with the tradition. In 7 years, this bond would become quite strong, Upon their dispersion, every little group would continue to feel this tie of sympathy and to take pride in their great achievement, with the result that organizations having the same or similar traditions would spring up in various parts. The idea would soon become prevalent among all bodies of Masons that their ancient brethren erected the temple. At any rate, it is clear that in the ancient mysteries, Solomon found ready-formed institutions with which slight changes were admirably adopted to the creation and cultivation of a bond of union and sympathy among the workmen on the temple, which would tend to make them more efficient, skillful, and zealous, which would greatly expedite the work. There is nothing, therefore, inherently improbable in the assumption that Solomon, with his wisdom and knowledge of human nature, would turn the existing religious associations of his time to his use in accomplishing his great and holy undertaking. This assumption does not imply that all the skilled artisans then in the world were employed in the building of the temple, or that Freemasonry descended from those alone who were thus employed. The number, however, must have been sufficiently great that the tradition soon gained currency among all the building classes throughout the then known world, that the erection of the temple was due to their predecessors in the craft. Thus may we rationally account for this tradition among us without insisting upon its historical accuracy. Modesty of true character. We are told that in the building of Solomon's temple, there was not heard the sound of any tool of iron. It is a well-authenticated historical fact that the Jews, not to mention other ancient peoples, believed that an iron tool was polluting to an altar to deity. Hence, in the days of Moses, the laws prescribed that in erecting an altar of stone to Jehovah, no iron tool should be employed upon it. The work of erecting the temple, therefore, went on noiselessly, but with speed and perfection. This tradition, besides being bore out by the known fact of Hebrew history, has a beautiful symbolism. It is this: the erection and adornment of the moral and spiritual temple in which we are engaged, that of human character, and of which Solomon's was typical, is not characterized by the clang of noisy tools. About true character building, there is nothing of bluster and show. It is a silent, noiseless process. It is the empty vessel that makes the greatest sound. Hale. A certain sign is called the Hale, or Hale, frequently misspelled Hell. The term is commonly understood, even by Masons, to mean accost or salute, but such is not its meaning at all. It is derived from the Anglo-Saxon helan and means to cover or conceal. The English word heal, for example, the healing of a wound or the healing of a mason, is derived from the same word and primarily signifies to cover. The Hale, therefore, has the same Masonic signification as do guard, and is intended to impress upon us the value of caution, a virtue so few men possesses. Tal, taler, taler. These words, so common in and so peculiar to Freemasonry, have a use and meaning similar to Hell. They derive from the word tal, used in covering houses. To tile a house is to cover it. One who puts the tiles on a house, who tiles it, is called a tiler. Therefore, to cover a lodge, to protect it against intrusion, is to tile it. The officer who does this is called the tiler. The correct spelling is undoubtedly tiler and not tiler. In a symbolical system like ours, the tiler, coverer, of a building would naturally become symbolically the tiler, coverer, protector of the lodge. Dugard. Dugard is another etymological puzzle. From what it is derived or its literal signification, no one knows. It is of exclusively Masonic use. The statement is often met with that it is an Americanism, and that it is unknown in England. Brother W.J. Songhurst, the capable secretary of Portron Coronati Lodge number 2076, London, takes issue with this statement and says the expression is known in the British Isles, and that it is a corruption of the French, "Du me garde," God protect me. With us, it is intended to teach care, caution, and circumspection, and especially a careful regard for the injunctions of secrecy contained in the several obligations. Cable tow. The candidate is early introduced to the cable tow. We have seen that his introduction into the entered apprentice lodge is symbolical of birth. According to the Hindus, the Brahmins wore a sacred cord symbolizing the second birth, which they profess. The cable tow thus has in Masonry what we might term its primary illusion. It has, however, a deeper symbolism. The word is not found in most of our dictionaries. It is characteristically Masonic. Its obvious literal meaning is the cable or cord by which something is towed or drawn. Hence, with the greatest aptness, it represents those forces and influences which have conducted not only the individual, but the human race out of a condition of ignorance and darkness into one of light and knowledge. With symbolical meaning of this kind of cord seems to have been employed in many, if not all, of the ancient systems of initiation. The explanation of the cable tow given in our lecture is its least important meaning. About this term and the connection in which it is used in our ritual, there is a flavor of the sea. Whence could we have inherited it? Probably not from the Jews, who were not a seafaring people. Tradition, however, connects with our fraternity, the Phoenicians, who were the greatest sailors of the ancient world. May it not be that in this term we have preserved another evidence that our traditions are not altogether unfounded. Dr. George Oliver, in his Theocratic Philosophy of Masonry, tells us that in the ancient mysteries, the neophyte was bound with a chain, and that the chain was symbolical of the penance imposed on every candidate for initiation by his confinement in the pastos. He says that the phrase, "he submitted to the chain," implied that he had endured the righteousness of preparation and initiation with patience and fortitude. Discalceation. It is very true that the plucking off of one's shoes is an ancient Israelitish custom adopted among Masons. It was employed among the Jews as a pledge of fidelity of one man to another. Such is the symbolism of it in the entered apprentice degree. It has another meaning with which we are not concerned here, but which is brought out in the Master Mason degree. Circumambulation. A certain ceremony, the candidate is told, was intended to signify to him that, at a time when he could neither foresee nor prevent danger, he was in the hands of a true and trusty friend, in whose fidelity he could, with safety, confide. This has a literal meaning very applicable to the candidate's then condition. But if we regard the candidate as we should, as a man pursuing the journey of life, the symbolical signification of this ceremony becomes truly profound. We all grope in the dark, from the moment we are born till we are laid upon the bier. In our moments of apparently greatest security, we often, to our astonishment afterwards, find that we are in the very presence of death. The sinking of the Titanic or the Lusitania was but one of thousands of proofs of this truth. The winds, the lightnings, the floods, and the fires destroy us without warning. With all of our boasted wisdom and foresight, we cannot see an inch into the future, but every man is in the hands of a true and trusty friend, in whose fidelity he can with safety confide. He needs but do his part to the best he knows, and then may rest confident that our All-Father will take care of the results in a manner befitting an all-wise and all-loving Creator. This is what the Mason means by faith. Upright. In the Eastern countries and formerly in Western countries, the inferior approaches the superior, the servant the master, the subject the sovereign, in an abased or groveling manner, oftentimes with the face averted, as though it were insolence to look indifferently upon the august presence. Not so in Masonry. The candidate is taught to approach the East with his face to the front, walking erect as a man should walk. This attitude is one of the characteristics that distinguish man from the other animals. A few animals can feebly imitate it, but only on occasion and then haughtily. Nothing adds more to a man's self-respect and strength of character than to walk erect, holding the head well and looking the world and every man squarely in the face. You may experience a feeling of sorrow or sympathy for a man who appears before you with a cringing or abject bearing, but with this feeling there is mingled contempt. This ideal we have turned into a terse through vulgar apatheme. Hold your head up if you die hard. We promptly suspect the integrity of the man who cannot look us squarely in the eye. Freemasonry teaches that all men are and of right ought to be free, that therefore no man should abase or humiliate himself before another. But this manly, erect attitude which the candidate is taught to assume has the same symbolism as the plum. It teaches that he should always walk upright in our several stations before God and man. Approaching the East. The East has long been deemed the region of knowledge and enlightenment. Undoubtedly, this ideal sprang from the fact that it is in the East that the orb of light makes its appearance after the darkness of the night. In the East, darkness, therefore, appears to take flight before the presence of light. Hence, too, approach the East, in our symbolic language, means to seek enlightenment and knowledge. Masons are said to travel from west to east, and in Preston's lectures and other more recent monitors the question is asked, what induced you to leave the West and travel to the East? The answer is, in search of a master and from him to gain instruction. The West is the region where light at the close of the day seems to be engulfed in darkness. Hence, symbolically, it is regarded as a region of ignorance. In the Egyptian religions, it was deemed the region of the dead, so that one who had died was said to have gone west. This same expression became common among the soldiers during the World War. This idea that the East is the region of knowledge and the West that of ignorance finds historical basis in the indisputable fact that civilization first arose in the East, and for many ages all seekers after knowledge were actually compelled to travel towards the East. The dignity of man. What is a man that thou art mindful of him? Psalms 8:4. What does Freemasonry teach us on this subject? What does it not teach? It does not teach in the chanting phrase of some religiousist that man is a worm. It does not teach that he is nothing or insignificant. It is by being a man, not a mere male of the genus Homo, that the candidate makes his request for initiation. There is a school of philosophy which teaches that man is a small, insignificant factor in nature, and that human life is mean and contemptible. In our view, it is not so. If we omit consideration of his anatomy and physiology of the other animals, what shall we say of his mind? What shall we say of that other man, that so-called subconscious self, with which the latest and leading psychologists now invest him? And lastly, what shall we say of the soul which we so fondly believe he possesses? No one has yet fathomed the depths of these or any other of the attributes of man. Away with the philosophy which teaches that man is of little moment in the universe, notwithstanding his diminutive size. He is the biggest thing in the world. There is nothing ludicrous or incongruous that a spark of deity himself should come to dwell for a season in this wonderful creature. The more careful should we be that we do not dishonor it. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.